All right, today we're getting into the story behind one of the most famous names in law enforcement anywhere in the world, Scotland Yard.
Yep. And we're going to map out how policing went from basically a total mess of local watchmen to this incredibly disciplined, science-driven organization that changed everything.
So let's start with that mess. Before 1829, what did policing in London actually look like? Because it sounds like it was pretty chaotic.
It was. I mean, you have this huge, booming city, but no real professional police. You had an old system of local constables and, the
And
watchmen.
when you say watchmen, we're not talking about highly trained officers.
Not at all.
Yeah.
We're talking about guys who were often elderly, poorly paid, and frankly, not very effective. Their main job was literally to walk around with a lantern and shout the time.
So with the city growing so fast, how could a system like that possibly keep up with crime?
It couldn't. That's the short answer. There was no central system, so criminals could just move from one part of the city to another. Crime was a massive problem.
And the public, they didn't trust the system at all?
Not really, no. A lot of people felt the law was just there to protect the wealthy, and that it wasn't fair.
Okay, so that sets the stage for Sir Robert Peel. He saw it as chaos and thought something had to change.
He was completely convinced that London needed a new, organized force just to maintain basic order. But it wasn't that simple.
Right, because creating a professional police force was actually a pretty controversial idea back then.
It was. A lot of people were afraid it would be like a standing army that the government could use to control them. They were very suspicious of that kind of centralized power.
So Peel had to be really strategic about it.
He did. He worked really hard to get the Metropolitan Police Act passed in 1829. And that law didn't just create a police force, it created a whole new standard for what policing should be.
A new standard of conduct.
Exactly. The new officers were trained to be professional, disciplined, and respectful. They were given specific routes to walk, called beats, and the whole idea was prevention first.
Okay, let's get to the name everyone knows. The official name was the Metropolitan Police. So where did Scotland Yard come from?
Well, it's actually kind of an accident of history. Their first headquarters was a building at 4 Whitehall Place.
Which was a very central location right near the government.
Right. But the building had a back entrance, and that entrance opened onto a courtyard called Great Scotland Yard.
And why was it called that?
The name goes way back. Historians think the land was once used as a sort of embassy or palace for visiting Scottish royalty before Scotland and England were united.
So the public started using that back entrance.
Yeah, that was the door everyone used to report a crime or talk to an officer, so people just started calling the police headquarters Scotland Yard.
And the name just stuck.
It stuck so well that even when they moved to a new building decades later, they had to keep the name. It was just what everyone called them.
It's amazing. And that public acceptance goes back to what you said about Peel's strategy, especially how the officers looked.
Oh, absolutely. He knew they couldn't look like soldiers.
That's where the famous blue uniform comes in.
Exactly. The British Army wore bright red coats. So Peel put his officers in blue to make them look more like ordinary, approachable citizens doing a job.
And even the hats were designed with a purpose.
The tall, black top hats, yeah. They weren't just for show. They were reinforced with leather, so they actually offered some protection.
And I love this detail. They were sturdy enough that an officer could use one as a step to climb over a wall.
Right. Everything was practical and designed to be non-threatening, which is also why they didn't carry guns.
Their main tools were just their presence and their ability to talk to people.
Yep. They really only carried two things. First was a small wooden club, a truncheon, but that was strictly for self-defense.
And the second thing was a rattle.
A loud wooden rattle.
Yeah.
That was their communication system. If an officer was in trouble, he'd spin the rattle, and the sound would carry for blocks to alert other officers on their beats.
And the public loved them pretty quickly, giving them the nicknames Bobbies or Peelers after Robert Peel.
They did. And that was because of the beat system. It was so incredibly disciplined.
So an officer had to walk a specific route on a very strict schedule.
An exact schedule. They had to be at certain checkpoints at precise times. It meant that every street was patrolled regularly. If you were a criminal, you knew a Bobby was going to be walking by soon.
It was all about being visible, about prevention.
100%. They were trained to notice things. A broken window, a person acting suspiciously. The whole point was to stop crime before it even happened.
And they weren't just there to arrest people.
No, a huge part of their job was helping the community, giving directions, helping lost kids. That relationship with the public was seen as the most important part of the job.
Which meant the officers themselves had to be totally reliable.
Absolutely. They had to be disciplined, sober, and professional at all times. That's how you build public trust.
So the force started small, only about 1,000 officers, but London was growing.
It was exploding. So the force had to expand, hiring thousands more men and covering more and more neighborhoods.
And this model became famous around the world, didn't it?
It did. Leaders from cities in the U.S. and all over England came to London to study how they were doing it. It really became the template for modern urban policing.
But all that growth meant they outgrew their original headquarters.
Oh, it became way too small. By 1890, they needed a new, much larger building.
And that's when they moved to the Victoria Embankment, to the building they named New Scotland Yard.
Right, and it wasn't just about more space. The bigger building meant they could organize better and have different departments working together.
Which leads us right to the next big evolution: detectives.
Yeah. For the first few decades, it was all about prevention. But by 1842, they realized they needed a special group just to investigate serious crimes after they happened.
And this was the detective branch.
Exactly. And the key thing is these officers didn't wear uniforms.
So they could blend in, interview witnesses, and gather clues without tipping off suspects.
That was the idea. But, the public was a little suspicious at first. This idea of police in plain clothes hiding their identity was a bit unnerving for people.
But they got results.
They got amazing results. They solved some huge cases, and their reputation grew incredibly fast. So fast that writers like Charles Dickens started creating fictional characters based on them.
And that really sets the stage for the next leap, which was all about science and technology.
This is where things really change. In 1901, Scotland Yard was one of the first police forces in the world to officially adopt fingerprinting.
Before that, how did they identify people?
It was not very reliable. They used a system of physical measurements, head size, arm length, things like that, but it was easy to make mistakes.
Fingerprints, though, that's unique.
It's irrefutable proof. They set up the Fingerprint Bureau to collect and compare prints from crime scenes. It turned investigation from an art into a science.
And this wasn't just observational police work anymore.
No, this was hard evidence you could take to court. It brought this incredible level of professionalism to the job.
Then came cars and radios.
Right. In the early 1900s, they got their first cars, the so-called flying squads, which meant they could respond to things much faster.
But the real innovation was putting radios in the cars.
That was the game changer. Suddenly, officers could talk to headquarters in real time. They could coordinate a chase or an emergency without having to find a public phone. Response times just plummeted.
The commitment to science got even more serious in the 1930s.
That's when they opened their own forensic science lab. So now they could analyze evidence like hair, blood, fibers, things you can only see with a microscope.
And this must have had a huge impact on the justice system.
Profound. Now, you could solve a crime without any witnesses, just based on the physical proof. It could prove guilt, but it could also prove innocence.
It's no wonder Scotland Yard became so famous worldwide.
Exactly. Their reputation for solving the toughest cases with this methodical scientific approach was unmatched. Other countries would actually ask for their help on investigations.
And of course, you can't talk about London detectives without mentioning Sherlock Holmes.
Right. And even though he's a fictional character, he was totally inspired by the logical, evidence-based methods that real Scotland Yard detectives were starting to use.
And today, that evolution just continues with things like computers, DNA, and fighting cybercrime.
It does. The tools keep changing. But if you look at the core mission, it's still what Sir Robert Peel laid out back in 1829.
Maintain order and protect the public, all while operating within the law.
That's it. That journey, from a handful of watchmen to a global symbol of justice, it's all built on that foundation of discipline and science.
Good luck with your studies.